Hello and welcome to part 4 of Unit 9. This is Imperialism in the Muslim lands and in India. The last little bit here on our Unit 9. Turkey is probably a place that you don't think too much about on a daily basis, but we used to call Turkey and its empire the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire was, all the way back in the 1500s, really quite a big deal. Its lands extended all the way over into the northern part of Africa, in Algeria and Tunisia, Tripoli and Egypt. And then it also extended into Europe all the way up to Vienna in Austria. And the Ottoman Empire from about, let's say 1683 or so, from that period of time all the way up until World War I, it was more or less decreasing in size or shedding different territories that it had. And one of its main foes, or one of its main enemies, was Russia. Russia borders with the Ottoman Empire, especially with the Turkish part of the Ottoman Empire. And the Russians were interested in having power over the Black Sea, and they were also interested in being able to get their fleet out of the Black Sea and into the Mediterranean Sea by going through the straits that are right there by Istanbul, what we used to call Constantinople. And so there were a number of wars between the Russians and the Ottoman Empire, or the Turks, and time again the Russians won those wars. There was a war in 1853 called the Crimean War, and what was happening there was kind of the same thing. The Russians were beating up on the Turks, and this time the French and the British, who were worried about Russia getting out into the Mediterranean Sea, decided to support the Turks, and so it's basically a war between Britain and France on the one side with the Ottoman Empire against Russia. And the Ottomans were able to win that war. Really, Britain and France won that war, but it just shows you how weak the Ottoman Empire was, and it continues to lose land even after that. Now, the Ottoman Empire tried a number of different kinds of reforms over its history, especially into the 1800s, trying to become more like a European state, kind of like what Japan was doing actually in the 1890s and 1900. But time and time again, they were really kind of unable to make the reforms that would make them a more modern state and a more industrial state. And so, as foreigners, British, French, for example, and to some extent the Russians, started to get into the Ottoman Empire, the Ottomans were forced to accept extraterritoriality, which means that they have to allow the British and the French folks who, let's say they do something wrong in the Ottoman Empire, they get turned over to Britain and France for justice. They don't get tried by the Ottoman courts. Another thing that was going on, as I said, was the shedding of territory, and so places like Greece and Romania and Bulgaria and Serbia and so on in the so-called Balkan region of Europe were shedding or were winning their independence. They were feeling very nationalistic. They didn't want to be controlled by Turks. They wanted to be controlled by a Serbian king or a Greek leader or a Romanian leader, and so they were winning their independence over the 1800s from Istanbul, or from the capital of the Ottoman Empire. Same thing was going on in Egypt, and Egypt becomes a very important part of our story as well. In Egypt in the 1800s, there was a ruler by the name of Muhammad Ali. He was given that power by Istanbul or by the Ottoman government, but then he became very powerful in his own right, and he more or less became semi-independent from the Ottoman Empire and then wanted to modernize Egypt. And he modernizes Egypt by modernizing the military or reforming the military to make it much more effective. And another thing that he wanted to do in order to make money off of the Europeans was to switch, have the farmers in Egypt switch from growing food crops to cash crops, especially cotton. And then that cotton would be exported, let's say, to Britain, and then the British would use that in their factories to turn them into textiles or clothes. And this is a good way of making money, but it's also very dangerous because sometimes nations that do that then don't have enough food to feed their own people. and oftentimes they have much worse working conditions trying to grow these cash crops instead of just the food that they would need to eat and be able to sell to other Egyptians. The grandson of Muhammad Ali, Ismail, is a person with whom the French make an agreement to create a very, very important waterway in world history, and that is the so-called Suez Canal. This is a canal that goes from the Red Sea in the south, extends through the desert here, going all the way up through to the Mediterranean. And so the importance of this canal is ships that are going from one part of the world to another don't have to go all the way around Africa in order to in order to reach Europe or in order to reach Asia. And this is really important for the British because they have, of course, Britain is in Europe, and they have India, and they have a sphere of influence in China. And so this really saved the British a lot of time, and it saved them a lot of money. It's the French who build this with Egyptian workers, of course, and the deal was that Egypt, or Ismail, would get half of the shares of the Suez Canal. In other words, he would get some of the profits from the Suez Canal. And that would have been a great thing for the Egyptians, except that Ismail continued to try to modernize Egypt, and spending a lot of money on things like railroads and telegraphs and communications and so on. And so Ismail got into an enormous amount of debt, and the taxation that he was putting on his people was not effectively collected. And so eventually he has to sell his shares of the Suez Canal to the British, who of course were really quite interested in having shares of the Suez Canal. And so the Egyptians are not able to profit from that very important waterway. In today's Iran, or Persia, you had Britain and Russia both competing with one another to kind of interfere in Persia's internal workings. Oil was discovered around 1908, and both Britain and Russia, as modern industrial states, were looking for oil to be able to power some of their industries. And the Persians themselves were really unable to spend the money needed to find the oil, to drill the oil, and to transport the oil to market. And so they did what oftentimes countries outside of Europe did, which was to grant concessions to European businesses to operate within Persia. So they would offer a concession to an oil company, and then the oil company would pay Persia, the Persian government, in order to have that right, but then would be profiting from the oil that they were extracting from Persia. This oftentimes caused a conflict between the Persian government and the people of Persia, who disliked the Western influence in their nation. Persia is a Muslim state, and just like Iran is a Muslim state nowadays, and it was very annoying to Muslim people to have foreigners, to have Christians who were more or less economically controlling them, and trying to also teach them European ways and quote unquote civilize them, or make them more like Western Europeans. And so there was quite a bit of nationalism that was developing in Persia that will really have an effect in the late 1970s. Hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit later. India is an extremely important part of the British Empire, and the story of how India becomes a part of the British Empire is really quite interesting. The British East India Company, actually a kind of corporation, moved into India in the 1600s, and eventually pushed the French out, who were also vying for territory in India at this point in time. India was divided up into a number of different territories or principalities, and so it was easy for the British East India Company to kind of go in and pressure the different territories to join into what was a British East India Company empire before the British government actually took it over. And the British East India Company had an army. It minted its own currency. It was really kind of an odd thing where you have this corporation that is controlling a large portion of India. And they also had military units that were staffed by mostly European officers, and then the soldiers themselves were different kinds of Indians, and those Indian soldiers were called sepoys. The British wanted the Indians to grow cash crops, things like cotton. Once again, same kind of deal with Egypt. Or you might remember the Opium Wars. It's opium that's being grown in India that the British East India Company is then selling in China, and the story behind all of that. They're trying to get the Indians to be dependent on British goods and industry, and send those kinds of things either, like I said, to China for the opium, or cotton, or another kind of a plant matter that you can make things out of called jute, and then the British would turn those things into finished products in their factories and then send them back to India and sell them to the Indians. Some industrialization was also occurring, and the Indians were encouraged to become, once again, more like British people, sending Indians to English-speaking schools, and generally more or less encouraging the Indians to assimilate into English or British culture. Now, I mentioned those sepoys before. By about 1850, the British East India Company had been able to take over most of India using those Indian troops. And there was, like everywhere else, there was quite a bit of Indian nationalism that was starting to happen. The Indians didn't want to be controlled by the British economically and politically. And in 1857, there was a nationalist rebellion. This is kind of like the Boxer Revolt, but it has a very specific cause. And the cause of the Sepoy Rebellion, or Great Mutiny, was the introduction of a new kind of cartridge or bullet that the sepoys were supposed to use. And the bullet or the cartridge was sealed with grease from animal fat, either from cows or pigs. And the sepoys were generally either Hindu, so they didn't want to bite into any sort of animal fat, or they were Muslim and they didn't want to bite into any kind of pork fat. And so they complained, and the British officers in the army said, "No, you're being silly, forget about it." And they actually had a mutiny over nationalism, and then also the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, was this cartridge. And the rebellion grew. Quite a number of sepoy troops were going against the British and killing British people and taking back control for themselves. But really, the rebellion failed because not all of the Indians rose up at this point in time, and I think part of the reason was that the Hindus and the Muslims didn't particularly get along with one another. You'll see that happening later as well. And there is a group of people, the Sikhs. You might remember we talked about the Sikhs. They too are there, and they are not joining in this Sepoy rebellion. Well, when this happened, the British government stepped in and sent troops and helped shut down the Sepoy rebellion. And then the British government said that they didn't really want the British East India Company to be controlling India, that they wanted it to be controlled by the British government itself. And this was really quite an important part, as I said, of the British Empire. It's so important economically and politically that it's called the jewel of the empire, and Queen Victoria becomes the Empress of India in addition to being Queen of Britain. That should be it for today's lecture, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, just give me a holler, and I'll see what I can do for you. Thanks. Bye-bye.